a handful of people were allowed in the room today. No press was allowed, but one of the people who was in that room, one of only 2 Republicans, was Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz. He joins us now exclusively to tell us what took place in that room. Congressman, good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Sean. And I know you look back fondly on your own days interacting with the Russia hoax. And here we find ourselves with Israel under attack, with a crisis at our border, with cyber attacks hitting our country. And what are House Democrats focused on? The Russia hoax again. We had former White House counsel Don McGahn. I found particularly persuasive his testimony that he never observed President Trump or any other member of Trump's government commit a crime, engage in any unlawful conduct. There was nothing new, nothing informative in that regard. But I do think the fact that Democrats are bringing back Trump administration officials for questioning shows that in the absence of an agenda that improves quality of life for our fellow Americans, this is going to be their focus, whether it's obstruction of justice or a January 6th commission or the D.C. Attorney General taking some action. There is not going to be a relenting when it comes to the pursuit of Trump by these vicious House Democrats.
So you were one of only, I think, 2 Republicans in that room. We're going to have to wait at least, I think, a week before we see a transcript come out of this. Let me ask you this. When that transcript comes out, is there anything that's going to shock us about what Don McGahn said? Did he turn on the president? Did he contradict him? Anything that we're going to be shocked when we see it?
To the contrary, Don McGahn, I think, thinks fondly of the president. Of course they had disagreements. When you have a tense environment like that in which you worked, there are personality scuffles, there are differences of opinion on particular subjects, different recollections on particular events. But Don McGahn did not do what Democrats wanted him to do today. That's the headline. Also, I think it was very interesting. During the Russia hoax, there was a real question as to whether or not Robert Mueller became special counsel after having gotten rejected wanting his old job back as FBI director. One thing I found very telling is that today, Don McGahn confirmed that Mueller was interviewed for the position of FBI director. He did not receive that position, and just a day, just hours later, after being denied that, he then had the opportunity to go and pursue the president with criminal process. I think that is very telling, and it really sheds light on the genesis of the Mueller probe, not illegal conduct, but really a desire for retribution.
Wow. Well, thanks for giving us insight into what happened in that hearing. We'll have to keep a pulse on it. But I do want to switch gears with you, Congressman, to COVID and Dr. Fauci. More reports are showing that Fauci continued to fund the Wuhan Lab back in 2014. This is when the gain-of-function research was actually paused by NIH, but he allowed the Wuhan Lab to continue to get taxpayer money to research gain-of-function. Do you think this is why he doesn't want the American people to think that this leaked out of the lab, that possibly he allowed taxpayer dollars to fund?
Dr. Fauci has blood on his hands, and now the entire country knows it. We know that the very type of research that erupted this virus onto the world was research that the U.S. taxpayer was funding in part, and that Dr. Fauci and his friends were directly involved in. And then in April of 2020, when I came out and said that this is something that escaped from a lab, it's not something that jumped from a bat to a pangolin, whatever that is, I was smeared by CBS News, 60 Minutes, and the like for having even suggested such a racist concept. Now that we're seeing the emails, not only are we getting to the truth, we're also identifying those that were involved in covering up the truth, and that's where the cover-up lands right on the desk of Dr. Fauci.
So speaking of those emails, it was interesting. Yesterday we had Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch on. He talked about the fact that Fauci, from what he could gather, reviewed and personally redacted each one of those emails, something that he had never seen in 23 years. Is there any way that you and or folks in Congress can actually find out what was redacted?
We are going to have to get to the bottom of that. I was actually in a meeting today with Jim Jordan and members of our judiciary staff regarding the basis for some of these redactions. For example, why is it that Mark Zuckerberg is able to offer up Facebook and various tools that he wants to design to help Dr. Fauci craft the message, but then the American people are unable to see that and ascertain what it was that Zuckerberg had in mind with this Fauci collaboration? I think we should all try to know that, particularly when the message they were trying to craft was false, not only on the origins of the virus, but on things like masks as well. So Facebook will not be able to hide behind trade secrets exemptions. Dr. Fauci will not be able to hide behind his own redactions. But as you know, Sean, very hard to get to the bottom of things when you don't hold the power and the gavels in Washington. That's why the Republicans retaking control of the Congress in 2022 is so important. It will give us the oversight authority necessary to lay this bare before the American people.
Congressman, I do want to ask you about that because it's been over a year now. We still don't have an answer. Obviously, China is probably doing anything they can to hide this information if they haven't already. So how can Republicans hold them accountable if we still don't have the majority in any way?
We're going to have to get the majority. We're also going to have to use the FOIA process. You mentioned Tom Fitton, a frequent guest on Newsmax. Tom Fitton does more as a private citizen to get to the bottom of records than the entire House of Representatives, it seems, on some days. And so I think that we're going to have to really dig into the documents. And then we're going to have to look at some of these international organizations. One thing that Joe Biden will never do is hold globalist entities like the World Health Organization to account. And so if we get power back in the form of committee chairmanships, we not only have to look at our own government, but we have to look at the partnerships that we've had and whether or not those partnerships inure to the benefit of our people or whether or not they just provide the largesse of the American taxpayer for China's interests and global interests, not American interests.
Congressman Matt Gaetz, thanks for being with us, especially on a Friday night.
Thank you. It's always great to be on. I'm a big fan of the show.
Thanks so much.